monthly meetings in my barn, actually, just across the water. And a group of people, which Nadine started a group which was to save Lee Burgley. And we came to realise it was a lot more than just save Lee Burgley. There was lots of other dimensions involved with resiliency of power, because the Leeburg power station wasn't doing that anymore. And there were a lot of other issues which were of concern to the fishermen. And we looked at what was happening down in the Klamath, where they knocked down 4 dams.
Trying to figure out how to help it.
I could hold it if you like.
There we go.
Not too small.
Too small.
Is everyone able to hear me better?
Yes, thank
All
you.
right,
That's
okay.
good. But not down.
So, yes, we looked at the Klamath Dam system down there, and we spoke to a lot of people who lived around where the dams came down. And what we found was that the community had been split. And it had been split into 2 groups, essentially, those that didn't want the dam down and those that did. Most of the locals seemed to want the dam to be there, and they felt that after the dam had been taken down, that they had lost money and that the community spirit would take a long time to repair. So our whole purpose is to try and prevent that happening on the Mackenzie. After the fire, definitely the community spirit here on the Mackenzie improved. It wasn't bad before, but it was a lot better after, where people were pulling together, and it was and still is a very nice place to be. So we didn't want to see things split. And that's what was happening with the Leeburg Dam issue. So we started out by having a look at the EWEB proposals, and we went through all of the things that EWEB had to say several times. And right at the start, we went up to the Oregon Department of Energy in Salem. They were having an initiative which was driven by the federal government, which was talking about resiliency. And the point of it is that if something major happened, like a giant earthquake or a huge fire which affected large parts of the state, that all of the emergency responders would know where to go for supplies of gasoline, where they could find water, where they could find, well, pretty much anything they needed in the event that it had been a major earthquake. And amongst the things that are of concern is power. And so we went up and we gave a presentation to that group, and that was the first time that we'd actually been seen in public out there.
And Bob, how was that received?
It was received very well, actually. In fact, the Oregon Department of Energy guy that was presenting the meeting asked at the end of the meeting if we were willing to come back and talk to them again. So that surprised me, to be honest. So the loss of resiliency, which you see on the screen, is the third item, was looked at. But we started digging into this really in depth, and I spoke to Mindy Schlossberg, our roving commissioner that looks after this area for EWEB. And to be fair, she helped me start digging into some of the decision that was made. But above all, I started going around talking to people. Dane's here now. I spoke to him on the phone, but I also spoke to the Herricks and people up and down the river and asked what their opinion was. And I wasn't doing this in a very formal way at all. I was just trying to get people's views and opinions, and that's exactly what Nadine and the others have been doing as well. Rex has been coming along to the meetings too. So locally, this is a local issue very much that we're looking at. So initially what we've done, we've set up as a company that is actually still in progress, right? And you haven't quite finished that yet?
sorry.
The setting up as a company is not quite finalised yet.
The company has the bank account is what we're having a problem with. We need an EIN number, and it's taken like a month, and we still don't have it. So we kind of open the bank account to deposit donation checks that we have. But we do have our name.
Is registered with the state as Leberg Lakes Activities. So it's just the bank account we're working on now.
Do
Okay,
you need
thanks.
a municipal sponsor? By that I mean, because you're going to be a nonprofit.
No, we're not.
Okay, so once we've got to the point where we've formalised our structure, we set up a bunch of people as officers of the company. I'll be quite honest here, the only reason I started with this was my wife decided it was a good idea for me to come down and see what could be done, because Nadine had reported that she was having some issues. So I came down, and there's a saying in my industry that you never put your hand up and volunteer for things, but apparently I put it up one too many times, so I'm the president of the group. And Nadine, thank you, next. Nadine is definitely my equal in the organisation, and she's been pushing this whole process for a long time. So we have monthly meetings held actually at my barn across the river, and it's not as rough as it seems. It's fairly luxurious barn.
To say the least.
And we've had one meeting here before. We had about 100 people, Nadine, we estimate.
97, yes.
And after reviewing all of the information that we could find, we extracted a lot of data where things just didn't seem to be answered by EWEB. So we made a filing with FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory people. And we're trying to do this openly and honestly, so I sent a copy of the letter directly to the General Manager of EWEB. And then Nadine took that filing and she sent it out to 27 different entities, amongst which was the Governor of the state. Actually, just last week, she wrote back and she said that she was aware of what was going on with Leberg Dam. She suggested that we reach out to FERC, which made me think she hadn't read the letter, because that's what we attached to it. And then she also said that they were keeping an eye on the water issues, and there were a couple of other points in there as well, but essentially the points that she was keeping an eye on were points extracted from our letter to her. So that's a good sign, even if she hasn't quite got the beginning copy done.
Well, one of the points that she brought out also is transportation. Because if they take the dam out, the road comes out. There's 27 properties that are going to not have ingress egress over there.
Thanks, Nadine. Yes, that's right. So it's gone out to a lot of people, and we've had quite a bit of help from Darren, our local representative, who's been along to a couple of our meetings, and he's actually himself been in to see EWEB, armed with our letter and a few comments. And that's an ongoing thing, and I believe as a result of that in February, we have been asked to go and talk directly with EWEB about what's going on. At the moment, about 1,400 people have signed a petition, and the petition isn't anything really elaborate. It's basically just saying, look, we'd like this to be looked at again because we don't think this decision is right. There's a lot of people with different opinions, so the whole point is to try and get everyone on the same table to make sure that we are in fact making the right decision in taking this dam down. 1,400 people is a number that represents half the population population of the Mackenzie Valley.
No, I'm just armed in case you have,
I'm armed in case you have a question. We have a mic. I do have a question, Bob. You say that you went to FERC or you spoke to FERC. What was their response?
So as far as FERC was concerned, they told me that the initial reason I reached out to them by phone, so eWeb has produced a fairly elaborate analysis of the costs of everything, and one of the analyses was to try and keep Leeburg Dam and the Leeburg Hydro Plant running. And they've run all of their cost scenarios out to 2040, which is the end of the license period. But FERC told me that if they do make repairs to keep that hydro plant running, they would automatically run a 10-year extension of the license period. So instead of being 2040, it would in fact be 2050. Well, when you're working out how much it costs for the generation of power, that 10 years makes a difference. And when you look further at the costs that they have put together, there's no number in there for taking the dam down at the end of 2040 or 2050. So that means they're assuming the dam's still going to be there. And that means in turn that it goes out to 2080, which is the end of the next licensing period. So when they say it costs far more to generate power at Leeburg Hydro Plant, that is just not true, because actually those costs are going to be spread all the way to 2080 and not just 2040. So that makes a huge difference, and so FERC was very helpful with that. Since that time, we have actually signed up and we have an account with FERC, and we've made a submittal to FERC, which has many of the points that I'm going to talk about today.
Lori has a question.
So Bob, if they have to relicense it, say 2040, could there be added expenses to move to 2080?
If they decide to rebuild and refurbish the dam and the hydro plant, FERC will allow up to 2050 without any extension of the license whatsoever. And there is always a fee for extending the license. So it would be just the standard fee that they would have had in the previous 100 years that the dam's been.
So they wouldn't necessarily readdress structural or whatever issues. They can absolutely be licensed all the way to 2080 with just the extension.
They will have to do an awful lot of work in order to meet the latest requirements from FERC.
But still, you're amortizing over a much longer period.
Much longer period, quite right, Rex, yeah. And now I'll come to a couple of these points in a moment, but everybody's seen how the canal system has been left empty like a great scar across the countryside. The opinions vary on how long that is. We've heard 5 miles, we've heard 7 miles, but somewhere in there.
1.8.
But their initial idea was to leave the whole thing empty because that's the cheapest option. They call it the stormwater system, so that all of the little tributaries, creeks and streams all come down into there. But that's really not going to work on a number of levels. First of all, I don't know whether you knew it, but I was told by a person sitting at one of the tables here that 2 people have already slipped into the canals themselves. And one, I believe, was a sheriff's deputy from what I heard.
He actually just had gotten hired, but he hadn't started yet. And then they withdrew the offer for contract after he tore up his knee and he had 40% disability.
Dana, could you say that again?
And it was one of our volunteers at Mackenzie Fire Department. And he just got hired by the Sheriff's Department. but he hadn't gone through all the checks and everything. He was walking his dogs along the canal there at Lever, and one of the dogs went down the hill and got stuck and couldn't get back up. So he went down there, got halfway down, slipped and fell, and tore up his knee, and had subsequent operations and stuff to repair it. But he had like a 40% disability in that knee, so the sheriff's department went through their conditional employment offer, and then we had another one down at Walgrove Canal, and that was a person walking along the bank and happened to just fall in it. We were able to get them out without a lot of serious injuries. But those canals are so steep, they're over 100 feet wide and 40 feet deep. You can't get out of them very easy. I mean, with the fire department, we just take one of our long ladders and stick it down there, and then they can crawl up it. But it's really hard to get up that bank unless you have some way to assist you.
Well, related to that, I thought I read that they wanted to restore it exactly
to how it was before the canal, before anything was done in the 20s. So I didn't see how that was going to happen, and with the creeks coming up the hill on under the highway, or how any of that was going to work.
Okay, so of the canal options, there were two. The first one is the one we're talking about now, which is a stormwater drainage system. Now, just finish up with that one, and then I'll address the second one. So, if any of us here put a fence up which was same height that we're talking about here, let's say 40 foot high and 5 miles long, it would not take a rocket scientist to figure that we might be stopping wildlife from moving backwards and forwards. So the state actually has various goals, and goal number 5 is that migration of wildlife shouldn't be impacted too much by human activity. So, in fact, having that as a storm drain violates goal 5 for the state. So, that's an issue, and then we also have, for many people up and down the river, there are issues with that canal currently being empty as it is. So going to the other end of the extreme, where they restore the landscape to exactly how it used to be, that would mean filling in all the canals, and that is the most expensive option of the ones that EWEB looked at. So in reality, they're going to end up having to do somewhere between the cheapest and the most expensive option. We're hearing via the grapevine that they're going to fill in as much as they can of the canals, but there are sections in which they're not going to fill in very much because it's rocky and all that kind of stuff. They are also, and I was reading it just a few moments ago, they're going to try and restore the original water flows that existed before they put the canal in, but it's not going to look as it was before. So that's their present proposal, and that proposal, before they can do it, has to be signed off by FERC. They are the gatekeepers here. So that was why I was just looking at it just before we came, just to see had they filed anything yet. The answer is no, not yet. Okay, so the next point I have is follow up with Oregon Secretary of State Audit Division. And we were going to do that, and we'll come to that in a second. And also investigation of hydrologic facts. So let me just see, I'll go ahead a bit here. Okay. So, first of all, after we lodged the documentation with FERC, I realized that, in fact, EWEB is a state organization. It is regulated by ORS 190. So it's regulated just the same as Lane County comply with the Secretary of State's requirements. So I realised that they weren't doing that. And so I went up, we had a board meeting before I went up, and I gave the board a presentation that we were proposing to take up. And the week before Christmas, I visited with the Secretary of State in Salem, not personally, but one of the henchmen. And I gave Amy John, who is the audit manager, a letter which basically said that we would like them to audit eWeb. The state has accepted that, and that is currently underway. I wouldn't expect too much from it, but it is absolutely and definitely a step in the right direction to get the state to examine this. So what we had to look at was the decision itself even legal under the Charter of eWeb? So because it's a state organisation, they are only allowed to vote in a binary fashion, i.e. they vote yes, they vote no. That's all they're allowed to do. They're not allowed to say, well, I think this item is 70% important, and this one's 20% important, and we're going to use that as a basis. But that's what they did. They had an off-site meeting, and they took all the points that they thought might be an issue, and Stanford worked out a multiplier earlier. So if they went in and they were asked about, well, what do you think about social issues? How important is that? So then they had a table with 0 and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then there was a multiplier. So if you voted 1, then 7 times 1 was 7. So you can see with that system, if somebody thinks that this issue really isn't important and they vote 0, effectively they're not going to have a vote. But the guy who's jumping up and down screaming bloody murder and votes 5, is going to get a massive vote. So there's an imbalance in the voting system, which is against Oregon law. So that was the first thing we've asked the auditors to look at.
And that's affectionately called ESG. That's what that means.
What's that stand for?
Environmental needs, social, and economic.
That's the
That's the triple bottom line statement.
Yes, triple bottom.
That was a part of the triple bottom line statement. Actually, they call it the 3 Ps, which is profit, people, and planet.
There you go.
Okay, so the other thing, well, we looked at several other things, but there was a buyer that showed up wanting to buy as a going operation the dam and the power plant. When it got to the board said, yeah, well, you know, if we can't run it, nobody else can. And that was what it said on record, those exact words. And then somebody else said, no, I agree with that, and are we going to give them any time to have a look and see if it really will work for them? And the other board member said, no, we're too busy, so we're not going to give them time. Potentially, that decision cost $200 million to the citizens of Oregon.
Switch, see. I don't know why it's getting you that feedback. It's on.
maybe it doesn't like me.
We like you, Bob. That's all that counts.
Okay, is that better? All right. So anyway, that's another issue I asked the auditors to look at was who did they think they were to ignore a buyer when the citizens of Oregon could be asked to stump up $200 million to deal with them. Also, I looked at the costs. On the costs, it showed that their cost estimates were about $20 a month for the average consumer of e-web power that it was going to cost. There were 2 bands, so it wasn't exactly $20. But they didn't say for how long. Well, when I looked at the papers, they said, well, we're going to borrow this money, and we're going to use commercial paper to do that, and it's going to be over 30 years. Well, $20 a month for 30 years, it's a lot of money. So that was one thing that really bothered me. The issue with they can get energy cheaper from Bonneville Power than they can make it at Liebherr was also raised very much in the paper. What they didn't say was, to get this cheaper power, they've got to spend $200 million. So they really, mathematically, have to build back in $200 million to get the true cost of what it is that they're buying. And that they didn't do. And again, I've asked the state auditor to have a look at that.
What did they take into account the risk if Bonneville was hacked or something? That, you know, the value of having a backup system here? Or was that ignored?
I'm very glad you raised that. Bonneville is run by the federal government, and so by and large, I hate to say this because people don't like the federal government by and large, but I would say it's pretty well run. But it is running pretty much at maximum capacity. And it really doesn't make any sense to be losing power capacity when you're already right up at the top end. Also, I have to say, we live in rather unsettled times. So basically our whole area here depends on a couple of wires coming down from the Bonneville Dam. And we all saw in the ice storm January 13th last year, widespread numbers of poles and wires down everywhere. Had Liebherr Dam been operating, the Mackenzie Valley would still have had power. So there's a real resiliency point in maintaining. It provides power for 13,000 homes. We don't have 13,000 homes in the Mackenzie Valley, so that means that provides extra resiliency for Eugene and Springfield, those kind of areas. So yeah, there's a lot of point in having it, just outside of all the economic things. So one of the big things that came out from what happened in the Klamath Dam area. So the Klamath Dam, as I'm sure you know, it's much bigger than our little dam. Our little dam's officially 22 feet high. The water's probably about 20, I think. Klamath Dams was 750. So when they took the water level down, the water table around didn't have much choice but come down a long way. But here, if we take 20 feet down, lower the level 20 feet at the dam, it's going to have like a wedge shape that it impacts. So it's probably going to be, just as a rough calculation, somewhere back to Good Pasture Bridge, maybe a little bit further, that the water level is going to fall. Well, we're on the side of the Cascade Mountains, so we don't know how much water is going to come from further up. That's going to flow in the rock strata down to that area. We do know it's not just the residents of the lake that are going to be most at risk from losing water, because it's going to flow from the sides as well. And that means that many people will find that the water level falls down below the bottom of the suction tube where their wells draw. So now we're faced with an interesting conundrum. The state of Oregon regulates water, and if somebody cuts off your water, if you have a rivulet, stream, creek, whatever you want to call it, going down through your property, you have legal recourse against the person that stops your water, as long as it's supposed to be there in the first place. So now we have a state-run organization that's stopping the water. So this could be very embarrassing for the state, because we had the state water master here at this very room tell us that they were not willing to pay for replacing wells that we had lost unless income was really low and you were on disability benefits or something like that. But most people wouldn't qualify for a well replacement. So that's definitely an issue we're going to be pushing as we go forwards, but it just doesn't seem right. Now, hydrologists have been mentioned, so I did actually talk to a hydrologist. Hydrologists, just between us, have a bit of a spotty reputation. Essentially, if you flash a few banknotes, they'll tell you what you want. That's the reputation. But it is sound science, that's the point to remember. So I found one of those working for the Forest Service, who happens to live at Blue River, who's a published author, all kinds of degrees and all the rest of it. And he was not too far out there, he was pretty much mainstream, so I was pleased about that. So his opinion is that, yes, we're going to lose water, pretty reasonable expectation. He has advised various governments around the world about removing dams. I don't know whether you knew it, but the Federal Register of Dams shows 91,000 dams in the United States. I talked to him about this number, and he's part of the team that put together that data. And he said, well, it's greatly underestimated because many of the dams are quite small. And quite probably it's nearer 1 million dams, some of them very small, but nonetheless that's what we're talking about. And that's part of the reason why the environmentalists like to see free-flowing fish in streams. That's why they're so concerned there's so many dams. So these are some of the issues that we're facing. One of the other issues that's a community splitting one is it better to take the dam down and allow the fish the freedom to flow backwards and forwards to come from the sea and to basically have salmon the way they used to be back in the time of Helfrich, when Helfrich was the big guy. Well, we've had a lot of discussions about that, and so I was surprised when I started talking to the fishing community, and it turns out that the fishing community, the ones I've spoken to, they favour keeping the dam. And the reason is their livelihood depends on fishing, obviously. And if the dam was taken down, there would be no replacement of fish coming from the hatchery. It would then depend totally on fish swimming up the river. And there probably wouldn't be enough fish, even if the program worked perfectly for many years to come. So essentially, we're hobbling the drift boats and fishing guides, which is understandable that they're not wanting that.
Bob?
Yes.
Those of us who lived here when Cougar did the drawdown to put in the cooling tower, this is going back, 12 years, maybe even more.
2022.
If you remember what the river looked like and how long, I mean, the turbidity in the river was impossible. And it ruined the fishing and all the water sports on the
Most of
valley.
it affected the insects, the caddisfly, the mayfly. Their beds are along the riparian zone, and they were all covered with silk by about a foot of silk. I was a guide at the time, had been for over 20 years, and I just shut down my business because I had no trips because the water was just mud for 2 years.
So I don't know if that's been factored in either.
And when I was a kid, we used to have the mayfly and the caddisfly hatches, and you could drive up the road and you'd know when you were in one because all of a sudden your windshield was covered with them. We lost those for over 10 years. I never saw a single caddisfly hatch for over 10 years after that. And they've slowly come back now to where we're seeing seeing them again, but, you know, we killed more fish than we ever could have saved with that cooling tower.
So, you know, the old adage, you can't mess with Mother Nature. You really, we've already put up the dam's been there for a year. It'll be tantamount to messing with Mother Nature, and then you take the dam out. It's got so many ramifications, as you know. But, you know, this is just one that I don't think gets talked about much, because unless you experienced that episode, you wouldn't appreciate the impact.
Well, the impact's also with the silt in the dam, because when they drained Cougar, they found DDT that they used to spray in the forest. And that was found in high concentrations in the silt up there. I don't know, EWEB says they've tested this and it's okay, but I don't really trust EWEB to tell me anything truthful anymore. So I don't know if that's the case or not, but we do know, and Nadine can attest to it, there's a ton of silt in that, behind that dam. So,
Well, they've said they don't know how it's gonna go out, don't they? I mean, they don't know what it's gonna do, right?
Well, two things about that. As an aquatic entomologist, two things about that turbidity, that suspended particles. It acts like a scouring pad. So you're scouring this river as you take that mud and silt downriver. So that's one way those insects and those fishes get scoured out. It works like a scouring pad.
Yeah.
Two is that the insects that you're talking about breathe through holes on the sides of their body, and they get full of this silt and they die. So they don't have a chance to live. There's no place they can go to hide out from this high turbidity level. So
Yeah.
from an entomological standpoint, very well.
yeah, we didn't see a caddisfly hatch for over 10 years after
They
that.
overscout
And they've
out.
slowly
Yeah.
started coming back.
Yeah.
Well, I'm actually glad, Jerry, that you raised Cougar Dam, because that takes me in another little road that we've been looking at.
You guys didn't have anything else to do, right?
So, in the National Register of Dams, they show each and every dam, and they show their reports, the inspections that have been done on the dam. And each dam is given a risk factor. So our little humble Lieberg Dam is considered to be a low risk and low probability dam.
Of probability of.
So what that means is that the risk of its failure is considered to be low, but it's more than that. It's more that if it does go, that it probably won't kill anybody. It might flood out their backyards or something like that, but it won't kill anybody.
That's good to know.
Well, if you're upstream, it doesn't matter. Sorry about that.
Along those same lines, what, was it 5 years ago that the government put a huge amount of money into repairs of the dam?
Oh,
How
yeah.
long out is that supposed to go, you know?
For the electrical.
Yeah. So following through though, I actually took a look at Cougar Dam as well. And Cougar Dam is a high risk dam, but low probability. So what does that mean? Well, that means the construction of Cougar Dam in a major earthquake, it's considered that it'll generate a small leak, the small leak will get bigger, and then eventually the whole thing would come down. And I don't know if any of you looked at your flood risk recently, but if you live along the Mackenzie, pretty much the entire way down, we've gone from not being in a flood zone to now we're in a flood zone. And the reason why is that the US Army Corps of Engineers took a look at the dam, and the level the water level would be if it failed. So my house just across here is down below Good Pasture Road. But if the dam failed, the water level would be level with Good Pasture Road. In other words, just above the roof of my house. So I called up US Army Corps of Engineers in Portland. Again, due to my professional work, I know the Army Corps of Engineers quite well, and I trust them a great deal. And I spoke to the engineer that's currently doing an assessment on Cougar Dam. And we spoke about these issues, and he was telling me that the federal government from time to time changes the standards and makes things so that they are requiring more improvement as time goes by. Which is why Leeburg Dam needs to be upgraded to meet the 1 million year flood rather than the one it currently is. So, as part of what we put to FERC, we have asked the question, why are you proposing to spend $200 million to take out a dam that is low risk and no money on Cougar Dam, which is high risk and is a threat to the entire population of the valley? So, that's cooking in the books at the moment. All right, so just going through what we're doing at
So,
the moment.
one more question about that. All these homes in this valley have been based on that dam being here, where they can be sited. Well, once that dam's gone, like what year was it that we had water and logs hitting the bottom of the Goodpasture Bridge? We'll have that again? That was pre-dam. So what are they gonna do? I mean, we're all gonna be in a new flood zone designation. I mean, what are they gonna do about that? All these houses are now gonna be in flood zones. And it's gonna be in 5-year or 10-year flood zones, which legally they can't be. What are they gonna do about that?
That was very remiss of me not to do the follow-up on that. I had this go, sorry. So I asked how they were addressing it, and the engineer in charge told me that the federal government had decided that it was quite expensive to be able to retrofit the dam, and that the interim step that they're following is to keep the water level very low inside Cougar Dam, except when absolutely necessary. So they've reduced the risk by lowering the level.
Which further kills recreation.
Yes.
So that is permanent, that lower level is now going to be permanent at Cougar.
Except if it gets to look like there's going to be a flood, in which case they do allow it to fill up and then take that. Okay, so fire protection was raised actually quite recently. The Los Angeles fires, we kind of missed that, but there have been complaints about some of the reservoirs being at a low level. Other accounts say that the water levels, this is from Governor Newsom, so take it with a pinch of salt. But, he did say that the reservoirs were full, but the firefighters are reporting differently. Some of the reservoirs that are in the heart of all that housing were down low. But in previous years, Leeburg Lake was a pickup point for planes coming in to take water. And directly as a result of what was happening, we've seen these water tanks popping up, one by the fire station, by the bridge, and I think one at the school as well, probably some other ones I don't know about.
Nathan can speak to that.
We have 10 of them throughout the district. But, yeah, another point there is I've begged EWEP repeatedly over the last 3 or 4 years to clean that boat landing out there, what they call EWEP boat landing. And it's not on. Yeah, I don't need it. And anyway, they will not clean up that boat landing. There's a big bunch of silt there. And so we can't launch a rescue boat there, and we can't draw water out of there without getting a ton of silt in our tanks. And during the fire, that was an issue. We had to go down and go across the dam and use the boat landing across the dam there. But they just have stalled me out every year about, oh, we can't do it now, we got to, you know. So they've made all kinds of excuses, but they haven't cleaned it out yet.
And whose responsibility is it to do that?
It's theirs. Under FERC licensing, last time they had to put a boat landing in when they took the one out of Ike's Pizza, they had to put a new one in. And actually, this is a long story, but the guys had a donor that was gonna pay for it and everything. And EWEB wouldn't help us get it passed through the county. And then a year later, they said, oh, we're gonna ask her to just not build that. I said, no, you're not, we're gonna fight that. So, in the end, they had to build the boat landing.
Twice.
Yeah, they built it, really messed up. And then the flood took on all the pavement and everything, so they had to rebuild it. But they built it in such a way that all the silt goes in there and collects in that back eddy, so, you know, they should have just let us build it, the guys, we could have done it right.
Which is a recurring theme with EWEB too, is that they are wrong-headed about so many things. They spend our money to do what they think is right. And the boat landing is just a perfect example. They were told time and time again, people who knew this river, knew what that would do in a high water event, didn't listen, finished it, and then, right, immediately.
A year later, yeah.
It's like right away, gone.
But yeah, they spent well over $1 million doing that, and the guys already had the stiller to buy the land for $500,000, and we had the Marine Board set up to build the landing for us, so it was going to be free. And they refused to help us, and then a year later, they tried to get out of their PERC contract, and we pulled the plug on that. So they had to spend $1 million building this landing that could have been done for free.
And the maintenance off that boat ramp wouldn't take more than a day with an excavator just to dig a hole.
They have an excavator, and I have a good friend that works there with them, and he said they paid a lot of extra money to get an excavator that had non-toxic hydraulic fluid so they could actually drive it into the river. What they did is they sat at the boat landing and reached out as far as they could, and that was it. The one time, they haven't done been bad.
I don't know.
Okay, so on the next steps, we're looking at more visits to people in Salem to try and get a little bit of support going there. But not just in Salem, because there are a few people that were involved in the Klamath Dam coming down who were opposed to it, politicians. So we're going to try and get their support as well, since they will have first-hand experience of just how badly this affects the community. You know, it strikes me I haven't actually spoken at all about something that's very close to many of your hearts, and that is what's going to happen when they take the bridge down, if that happens. So we have been looking at the road situation, and the financial aspect of it is that being able to go probably back through Dam Road, either going to the north or the south, EWEB has put a price tag of $20 million as the benefit for going along Dam Road. Now, I would actually argue that number, but that's what it says on all of their papers. So,
To where?
I'll come to that later. So I've been in contact a lot with Lane County, and particularly with Lane County Transportation Division. And we sent them a copy of what we had sent to FERC. And they're absolutely, well, in the colloquial, they're really pissed off with EWEB. Because EWEB is not playing ball with the county either. And there's a million questions which have been fired backwards and forwards, and EWEB hasn't answered any of them. The triple bottom line study, which was the basis of this decision, the county officially asked EWEB to send them the triple bottom line study, and EWEB has refused to do that so far anyway, which is a little odd. So the way that EWEB's decision was made was to look at what's inside the E-Web fence, and they really did not care or consider very well what was happening outside the fence. So going back to where we were with the transportation issue, that's why we've seen surveyors running around surveying everything. So we know that one of the ideas they looked at was to come through the down road and then to cut across the top of the Good Pastures hill by the half barn that they've got there, come clean across the road to the yellow gates to that little county lot that's next to the Bodakowskis, and then they put in a bridge there. So that's one of the routes that they've surveyed for a bridge rather than using Good Pasture Bridge, which cannot handle heavy trucks, too small and all the rest of it. They've also surveyed this road here, Thompson Lane, with a view to putting a bridge across, extending Thompson Lane across, and coming through my house on the other side and up to Good Pasture Road. Which was a bit of a surprise to me to look out the window and see the surveyors looking there, but I figured out what it was eventually. So they're looking at lots of possibilities. But it does come back to if they're going to put a bridge back in again, somewhere round about where it is less disruptive than anything else. So that's one of the pressure points that we need to put with the state if it does come to that, because there's two levels. The first is trying to get all of the right information on the table to refine the decision. I believe personally that if they really re-examine this in a cold eye manner, it won't justify removing that dam. It does not. The economic case isn't there, the environmental case isn't there, and the disruption that it causes is huge. The dam's been there for 100 years, so Mother Nature has more than adapted to it. It's now used to that being there. So, an environmental impact assessment is one of the things that we have asked that E-Web do. So one is to get the environmental impact assessment. And this was recommended by an attorney. We've had 5 attorneys looking at this, not paid by the way. And one of them suggested when we talked about an environmental impact assessment that this was a very good thing to do because the state are masters of delay. It takes about 3 years to do an environmental impact assessment. So it might seem like just a piece of paper, but it takes a long time to do.
And would you trust if E-Web was at the forefront of this study, would you trust the results?
Environmental impact studies are done by the state.
Okay, so E-Web's fingerprints would not be on it.
Another question. I may have missed this in all of our conversation. Have they considered a bridge, like where the dam is? I think I missed that. Have they considered that?
They have, and that's the $20 million premium. So if they put a bridge there, they estimate it's going to cost $20 million more to put a bridge in there than it would to come through the down road and do something else. But I have to say, those numbers, right at the start of all of their considerations and deliberations, so they may have given it a $20 million premium because they were assuming that they would be able to use Good Pasture Bridge, and they can't.
Because they're going to have to put a bridge somewhere else.
So the $20 million is much more.
So Good Pasture Bridge is definitely out. I understood that was iffy. It's definitely not okay.
There's no such word as definite.
They can barely handle the traffic.
Oh, I know.
that it's got,
That's why I didn't understand how that works.
Well, I think there's a lot of problems, and that Lane County Transportation wouldn't sign off on it. I do know that. They have concerns, one that we all know since we live here, that if you want to make a left turn onto Good Pasture Bridge coming from Bend, you could well have someone not able to stop. And I think all of us coming up to the bridge, take a look and make sure no one's trying to turn into the bridge coming from them before we even go there. But it is a high-risk zone, so they know that.
Especially during cold weather where that little spring that comes across right at that point goes to ice.
Have you noticed our ice skating rink?
Yeah.
And the Blueberry Farms trucks would all have to be repurchased. They'd have to buy new trucks to get across that bridge.
Jim wouldn't do that. They actually have a second way out, which isn't widely advertised, but they can get out the other way if they really had to.
It's a long way.
Oh, yeah, it puts them either all the way up down Dearborn or over the other bridge that is, is hyper speed as well.
So it's also, you raised Jim in a way there. So Jim was telling me that when in their planning, after they've taken the bridge down, they have to remove the pier on the fish hatchery side. And of course their trucks would have no way to remove all the rubble and debris unless they've got a road. So what they've been asking Jim is if they can rent an access through his ranch all the way down to Dearborn, which he has. So Jim is not a supporter of the bridge going. He thinks it's best to keep it there. But he's a canny farmer and he's got to make money, so he's okay with the idea of EWEB, if they have to do it, going down through, because he's got a very long road which he knows needs to be improved, so his ranch is going to be better off because of it.
Plus, part of that road is also owned by Welsh.
It's also
Welsh land. After the bar gate, from there down, further down towards Dearborn is Welsh land.
Jim has direct access to Dearborn through his ranch.
Oh, right.
Is that Wildish or warehouse?
Well, it could be warehouse. It might be
Likely to be warehouse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, so, but as far as if they wanted permanent access down through, it would cut Whitewater Ranch in half. So that would probably mean a very large lawsuit because I can't see them going with that. So anyway, just going on to a few more bits there. We're hoping for a radio appearance at some point. Again, Darren Harvick, last time we had a meeting with him, actually, he phoned and arranged for a radio station to at least allow us to talk for a bit, so we've got to make that happen. The same with a TV spot, that's been spoken about as well. Meeting with EWEB, well, that's definitely coming up sometime in February, so that should be interesting. And if any of you do see repair work going on the canals, and that means collecting equipment, all that kind of stuff, please let us know, because we do have to react to these things and try and understand what's happening and make sure it's in line with a plan. EWEB's not famous for following plans.
So what about that, I don't know what it's called, the power plant? That they put in here
Yes.
a couple years ago?
Oil
Are they,
Creek substation.
substation, are they disassembling that because trucks are carrying things out?
That's actually how they're going to get the power from Onville Power and feed to us.
So they're reworking it right now?
No, it's brand new.
It's all brand
I
new.
know it's brand new,
They
but
did
trucks,
that on purpose.
no, I know that, but trucks have been
But-
seen going out of there with equipment.
Not at the substation, at the power plant,
Oh,
Oh,
no.
at the power plant.
at where they generate power, yeah. There's an old substation in there, and they've been moving equipment out of there, so they know they're not going back.
There was a conversation recently that of the two turbines that are there, they were scavenging parts off of one of them.
Yes.
And that's probably what those trucks are doing.
That's what they're doing.
For where?
Maybe Walterville.
Walterville's not running.
It will be.
Oh, let's talk about Walterville for a second. According to a conversation I had with Darren Harvick just 2 nights ago, they are going ahead with the refurb of the canal down there. And guess what they're going to do? They're going to polyline the canal. So they can bring that canal, you know, to better flow to feed the power plant
So when
there.
a little deer falls in it, they're dead meat.
The whole point is, it gets us back to I apologize, one of my original screening matches with eWeb about, did you ever consider, polylining the canal here? And the answer was no. And then upon further pressure, they said, well, it's 7 miles long and we can only, they can only do that up to 5 miles. Bad news, in 3 documents that we were able to get through research just recently, those 3 agencies called that route 5 miles. I measured it myself by driving it, comes at about 4.7, and I threw in an extra 10 just for curvature of the canal, making 4.8. It's below their threshold. So they could do it if they wanted to. They don't want to. They threw out 7 as a number just to try and stop the conversation. Yeah. And by the way, it's my opinion, although it may be, that polylining that canal would also help mitigate concerns over earthquake movement because it's flexible. Okay? And according to Dana here, the last time they did any maintenance on that canal was 1978. Was that about right, Dana?
Yeah, early 80s.
Yeah. They used to go annually or every other year and do concrete work with regard to leak spots or that kind of thing. They stopped doing that 40 years ago. So the point is, eWeb has not been doing their job in terms of maintaining the canal, which also cut off the salmon hatchery, its water source, which they've ultimately moved that back over to the Weaver side, or the other side of the dam. So it's eWeb doing what eWeb does. The other thing is, one of the other questions that was risen for us early on in our committee work was, shouldn't it be a historical site? Lo and behold, again, through some great investigative work by a gentleman in the area, found that in 2015, eWeb, probably between 14 and 15, had applied for historical designation on that property, including the powerhouse, the dam, the whole structure, and it was granted. It's an 85-page document. It's very specific as to what can and can't be done with that, and it is a historical site. The only reason they were doing that at the time was because they were looking for grant money to pay for the repairs.
Actually, Rex, I have more up-to-date information.
Oh, good. Did I lie?
No. When I was on the FERC site earlier on, there was recent correspondence with FERC and eWeb concerning historical designation. Essentially, eWeb is required by law to designate anything over 50 years old as historic. That's not a choice they have. And they're required to maintain it, they're required to report on it, and they're required every January the 12th to have that report into FERC.
And obviously, they haven't mentioned that to anybody because the requirements that are with regard to that designation are so specific as it relates to maintenance, as it relates to modification or removal. I mean, you have to have like half a dozen different agencies approve any removal.
Yes, that's all in there. The actual letter, I have the letter here if you can read it, but they are engaged with Indian tribes and all the usual bunch of suspects that gets involved with these kind of things. So there's a lot of stakeholders in what happens. So